You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/PODKATZ13. Just go to Indeed.com/PODKATZ13 right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
Well, welcome everybody to a New Spaces tonight, talking about JFK assassination and the surroundings about it. I am Tim Gardner. You can follow me at Tim Gardner Project, obviously, on here. With me is Cory Hughes, author of the awesome book, A Warning from History. It's a really, really good book, and he's working on another book as well. He'll explain it a little bit later in the forum tonight. Tonight, just want to be covering, just want to make a preface this out, but our opinions are strictly our own. And we're just going to be centering this basically around the assassination and Oswald and all the key players in the whole thing. So again, thanks to everybody for joining us. And if you have any questions, or feel free to join in with us. So thank you. Well, anyways, Cory, so let's go ahead and start off with what you shared with me a couple nights ago about the Marina Oswald tapes and how that piqued your interest.
Yeah, that's interesting stuff because they're still lying to us about Oswald's activities, where he lived, where he worked, all that stuff. And Marina is clearly a willing participant in the setup of Oswald. So when I come across things like this, and I actually have a Russian associate of mine translating that second video, which is all in Russian. When you dig into little things that Marina says, that she says things that don't really make any sense. She says that her and Lee had lived in Oak Cliff and they were going to visit the house there. But the only house that I can think of was the Elspeth house in Oak Cliff. I really don't remember. I think that might have been in Oak Cliff. But I don't know why she'd be going to visit the Elspeth house, like, in 1964. So that's weird. She's talking to Katya on the phone, and she, who's connected to Declan Ford, I guess. And Katya and her are talking, and they have a brief interaction where she says she must be talking about Robert Oswald, because it's pretty obvious to me Robert Oswald had the hots for Marina. And she mentions this to Katya, and Katya says to her, he shouldn't be thinking about you in that way. And then they change the subject real quickly. So there's a lot of interesting stuff in there. Marina knows way more than she's ever said. I am not going to get to Oswald post June 62 for a long time, because I have to finish my current book, and then I'm doing Oswald in Russia. And then I'll get to Oswald post 62. But the more I learn about the details of Oswald post June 62, when he comes back, the more I realize that nothing we've been told is true at all. Zero. Like, none of his fucking jobs, those were all front jobs. Every job he had was connected to the CIA, including the book depository, right? Then you have the weird shit popping up about, when he gets arrested, he had the pay stub for the American Bakery Company in Chicago, right? That's weird. That's weird shit. Like, nobody's been able to figure that out. The guy whose check it was says that he didn't know Oswald and doesn't know why he had a missing check. So the whole thing is fucking weird, right? There's other stuff going on. Oswald, I promise you, Oswald never worked a day at the book depository. It doesn't make sense for him to have ever been there. There's some weird shit going on with the book depositories, like a roster. It's got 3 different names on the fucking roster for him. One of the rosters says Harvey Oswald worked there. Another roster said Lee Oswald worked there, and another roster said Leslie Oswald worked there for the last week that he was employed. So what's that about? Why are they changing Oswald's name on the roster? Doesn't make any sense. But I can tell you he never stepped foot in that fucking building because it doesn't make any sense for him to have ever been there if he wasn't there on the 22nd. So,
Yeah, it's interesting because I mean, obviously the mainstream theme about it from conspirators is that obviously he got a job there from Ruth Payne, and
well,
there
the
was
Ruth Payne it originally came from Buell Fraser's sister.
right,
That's where the lead
right.
came from. And she's all kinds of fucking caught up in this thing. So,
Oh yeah. Well, but at the end of the day, I mean, I made this analogy that basically that town at that particular time was a Truman Show, and I talked to you about this. I
yeah.
mean, it was like a Truman Show. They literally whether you call them decoys or whether you call them, I don't know what you would call them. They're CIA assets
Yep.
somehow, and they're planted there, and it's like a whole little world at that particular time. And for people to, I just it for me when I think about Ruth Payne and how she just commits her silence still to this day about how dedicated she was to that particular job, just like James Angleton.
Hmm. So, no, like, and to kind of emphasize that point,
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/PODKATZ13. Just go to Indeed.com/PODKATZ13 right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
I don't know if you listened to the episode I put out today on the Garrison Sprague conference, which is turning out to be like one of the best fucking documents I've ever seen. Um, he talks about a guy named Lazar, who was the boss of the Lincoln Mercury dealer, allegedly, when Oswald went to go meet with Bogard and do the test drive, right? But that guy, Lazar, turns out he was in the fucking Marines. He was in Marine Intelligence. He was in Atsugi after Oswald was. And then he's got this lifelong like intelligence career, but for 9 months he was the boss at Lincoln Mercury in fucking Fort Worth or Dallas. Like, what the fuck? Like, you have a whole career of intelligence, but then you happen to go work as the boss of a car dealership. What is going on? Then you go back to intelligence after that? Give me a break. Give me a break.
Yeah,
Like, every single
yeah.
one of these incidents is a staged incident. Every single one of them. Everything was
It,
planned in advance. Total Truman Show. Like, really, it's fucking unbelievable the length to which they did this. Like, you know, even the janitor's
yeah.
in on it. It's crazy.
I know, right? Even the cab driver that
Right.
allegedly drove him. Yeah, it really boggles my mind about just even the post story. We talked about that last spaces about the timing, and you said that you don't even believe that he was there, but just even the story about him getting from the building, if he was there, to randomly shoot a police officer and then go to the theater. My take on this whole thing is that they were supposed to murder him,
Yeah.
and had they not murdered him, then the whole story would have been different. I mean, you made a really good point about Frazier, and if Frazier was just charged, like, none of this stuff we wouldn't be having this massive conspiracy theory field that we're having right now.
Yeah, because nobody would ever connect the dots. It would be like, pick someone who worked at the book depository, like a Joe Molina type or one of those other obscure characters, right?
Mm.
That's what Oswald would be if it was blamed on Frazier. And like, they would make sure to get rid of every goddamn. There would be no Oswald files. Period. There would be nothing if that was the case, right? So no one would ever be able to look into Oswald and uncover like the unusual covert seeming naval intelligence network that he was associated with, because that's ultimately what this comes down to, because all the Oswald stuff started before the CIA was even the CIA. So
Yeah, it's crazy because obviously Hoover was monitoring him in '60, and we talked about that.
yep.
But yeah, and the crazy thing about that is if they were monitoring him, in my opinion, probably in the late '50s when he was actually, in the military. This guy had, pretty much agent written all over him, and it was somebody they just didn't want to get exposed to, and you could see by his body language when he was arrested, he seemed pretty calm and collected, and he was just like, oh shit, when the reporter told him that he was
Right.
being charged for the murder of the president.
Right. It's at that moment that everything started to fall into place. I promise you, he had encountered some anomalous incidents, like perhaps he was told to do some things or go somewhere or whatever. And in hindsight, at that moment, I have no doubts it all fell into place for him, and he knew what was up. He knew who set him up. He knew he didn't see. Here's another thing: we have a lot of statements and notes from like Curry and whatnot of allegedly what Oswald said. We can't fucking believe a single word that they said Oswald said while he was in custody. So every single thing that Oswald allegedly said while he was in custody has to go right out the window, because every one of those fucking guys who are bringing that information to us are liars. So
Yeah, especially Robert Oswald. I mean, I just watched an interview with Robert Oswald on NBC, and I made a post about it. And what he would, I mean, if that in fact was his brother, I mean, he not only betrayed him, but I mean, just what he. Look, I'm not trying to defend Lee Harvey Oswald here, but what I'm trying to say is that Robert Oswald really is he's the worst of the worst, like a lot of those people back then.
yeah, well, so Robert Oswald, he goes back to like 1953. He's stationed at Opelika, an ultra fucking high security CIA base down in Florida, where they ran all the operations against Arbenz in Guatemala. Right? He was there at that time under the most top secret shit going on in the country. I mean, that's wild that he was even there in the first place. Who else was there? E. Howard Hunt there at the exact same time Robert Oswald was there. And we know Hunt is definitely connected to the Cuban operations that were going on in New Orleans. Even though he
Yep.
did a good job of, he was never photographed in New Orleans, and he did a good job of keeping his name out of things. But he was most certainly connected with David Atlee Phillips and them, and Friends of Democratic Cuba and all those Cuban operations. I mean, he was most certainly connected there. So it's just this another thing. Like, I keep coming across weird coincidence after coincidence after coincidence. People you wouldn't think are in the same place or in the same place. Just stuff like that.
Yeah, me too. And then you find out as you keep researching this whole thing how bad the people were back then. It's just like, I mean, they're bad
Yeah.
today. Everybody, but I mean, oh my God, I sick to my stomach to find out some of your heroes you looked up to how bad they
It's
were.
weird. I don't know if it was just a thing of the time or what, but like a lot of the guys, there were a lot of Jerry Hemming type guys and Lawrence Howard type guys, like ex-military gung ho, ultra right wing, working with the CIA, wanting to overthrow these countries, right? Like, it's crazy because I've never seen that in the modern era. I don't never bumped into anybody who was like that in the modern era. Like, does that even exist today? I don't even know.
Mm.
Because it's weird because those guys like I never understood what made those guys tick. Guys like William Seymour and Lauren Hall and those guys. Like, it seems like these are guys who just should have stayed in the fucking army. They should have just stayed in the military because that's what they love to do. But no, they get out like right after 4 years and they start working with the CIA doing this paramilitary stuff. It was like, I never understood why. Like, what drove them to do that? Especially Seymour. Seymour is the one you hear the least from. Like, that's the least the guy we know really the least about from his own personal saying. Was that we have all kinds of stuff about Lawrence Howard and Lauren Hall. They talked. William Seymour never gave an interview that we know of, and if he did, we don't have a fucking copy of it. But they tracked those guys down big time. Hell, they even tracked down Guy Gabaldon and interviewed him. So where's the Seymour interview? That doesn't exist.
Well, I mean, and that's what my argument was, yesterday's. I mean, I'm grateful for, Morley for digging into, the Joe Joanides file and whatnot. And I know your stance on Morley,
Morley is the
but I
modern day
mean,
Joanitas. Morley and Diogenio are the modern day Joanitas. Just like what Gionitas did during the HSCA is what they're doing today with fucking Luna and the stupid committee they got going on. Those guys work for the CIA. They have to, because you can't be that fucking stupid. You can't be on Kennedy for 40 fucking years and not realize David Ferrie was in Dallas. You can't. It's impossible. It's totally fucking impossible. So these guys have to work for
but
intelligence. They have to, because they
right,
can't be so
my
fucking dumb.
right, but my point to what I was saying a little bit earlier, and that's that it would be logical, but my point would be is that with documents, everybody wants to find this smoking gun in the documents, but they were destroyed in the 70s, man. 60s or 70s, those things were done and they're tossed.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're going to find anything, you're going to find basically the weak residuals of anything. I mean, like the Thornhill document, which said that he freaked out and you know eh, and committed suicide, or there was a lot of KGB Cuban documents that were in there. I'm not sure what the Joannese documents provide, but there's not going to be anything that's really ground changing in that whole deal.
Yeah. So as far as documents go, like there's a ton of documents out there right now that are super important. Here's a great example. Um, at the Alamo Motel on Saturday, when after David Ferrie and the guys allegedly leave from the Winterland and go to Galveston, they're still checked in to the Alamo Motel. So they're technically checked into two hotels that Saturday night, the 23rd, and David Ferrie stayed in Hammond. So you have three different parties staying in three different places. Okay. What is the clue that we have at the Alamo Motel? Well, one of the maids there told the FBI that she saw a blonde woman in their room. Okay, this is a major clue, because there's no blonde woman on the road with David Ferrie and these guys. Well, David Ferrie's not on the road, right? He's in Hammond, but Sergei Arcacha and the boys, they don't have a blonde woman with them, right? So who the hell is this blonde woman? Well, I connect the dots between that and the woman speaking Spanish calling the boarding house, talking to Carrie Thornley about, what was it? Not Magazine Street, the other one, Marcellus. So who's the blonde woman? To me, it's obvious the blonde woman is Candy Barr, because Candy Barr was kicking it with Jack Ruby when he went to Galveston, because he went to Galveston all weekend. He went there and he came back just in time. You know the story about him coming back and waking up Larry Crawford and that, and him going to look at the stupid billboard. That's all
Yeah,
bullshit. That's a nonsensical story, because that's probably about the time that Jack Ruby got back to fucking Dallas from Galveston. Jack Ruby was also seen in a hardware store or a sporting goods store buying a gun. This was told to the FBI. He was identified by a kid who was in the store who recognized him when he saw him on TV shoot Oswald. And this makes perfect sense, because that leads the opening for Samuel Ruby to impersonate him all day in the hallway at the police department, at the midnight press conference, on the phone in the background of the Dallas Morning News about 12:45, right? So that makes perfect sense to me. So that document saying that a blonde woman was at the Alamo Motel is a priceless document. How much time does Morley spend on something like that? None. Because he's trying to find answers digging into Angleton shit, and you're never going to find anything there.
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/PODKATZ13. Just go to Indeed.com/PODKATZ13 right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
So,
yeah.
it's like Indiana Jones. They're digging in the wrong place,
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's my thing is that I respect pretty much every researcher that's out there, even the James Files people, because they're passionate about it, right?
Right. I give them
But
that much.
yeah, and but at the end of the day, it's like it's pretty obvious what's out there. In my opinion, it's pretty obvious what's out there. Like you got to connect the dots. Why did this happen? Why did that happen? And it's pretty much right there in front of your face. I mean, for me, I mean, obviously, I don't know the names of the shooters and whatnot, but I mean, it's pretty obvious about like how the thing was coordinated, and it wasn't strictly coincidence. And CIA and the New Orleans group and all that stuff. I mean, that all adds up. That's actually, pretty much factual if you look into the whole
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. I mean,
And
to think that Jim Garrison had one of the shooters on the Knoll in his office Monday morning is crazy to me. Crazy. That's how close they came instantly. because of Jack Martin, and Jack Martin hated Ferrie. So he wasn't bullshitting. He, took back his statements. But to me, the idea that Ferrie was in Garrison's office that Monday that's wild. That's how close he came, and I think he might have one day knew, but he never indicated he did. Not in any of his notes or any of that stuff.
Yeah, it kind of makes you think about, and you told me last week about the Marcello thing, and how I dismissed that initially, but that added up as well. The Marcello aspect of it, and
Well, the three biggest mob bosses were Marcello, Trafficante, and Giancana.
Giancana, yeah,
And all of them had to throw on something like this big. Everybody's got to throw in, right? Giancana sent Robert Bernard Baker. Trafficante sent Valente, and Marcello sent the New Orleans crew. And then you got the Cleveland guys who came in there. You got Leo Masseri, Danny Green. They were there. I'm pretty sure Licavoli was there. I've flip-flopped on Licavoli a bunch of times, but I'm pretty sure Licavoli was in Dealey Plaza. They had to be there. They all had to be there. Dealey Plaza was a closed set. It was a closed scene. That's why they had cops up there on the knoll to make sure nobody came in the back way or anything like that. They blocked off as many people as possible. When you go through the photographs of Dealey Plaza, 75% of those people have not provided a statement. We don't know who they are.
Yeah, and I want to jump to the Secret Service real quick, and about how they had the separation from the back car to where the front car is, and they could have had agents on the sides of the vehicle to stand there to block anything in that regard from happening. And that it just so happened that one day that they didn't have that detail going on, and they were drunk the night before. Most of them were. I'm not saying every single one of them, but it just goes to show the sloppiness and how that looks too from an outsider looking in, about like, what was this Secret Service doing? It's just, I mean, everything adds up that you question, really adds up to this whole thing.
Yeah, and the Secret Service stuff. So I don't know if I've ever talked to you about the Secret Service car and Morales and all that stuff, but McIntyre photo number 2, it's very clearly obvious to me the two people on the side of the Secret Service car are no longer Reedy and Landis. They entered the car in Dealey Plaza, just as their statement said they did. And to me, it's obvious Jack Valenti and David Morales are the guys they picked up. And it's so clearly Morales, but yet people will look at it and go, no, that's Landis, even though the hairline's different. Morales has a fucking mustache and a flat top. It's just, how can people have overlooked that for so long? It really drove me crazy. That was one thing that really kind of got me when I started researching, is that I was coming across things that I was like, wow, this is new. No one's figured this out before. Wow, no one figured this out before. And then I get to like the David Ferrie stuff, and I'm like, holy shit, this whole story makes perfect sense, and everybody knows about David Ferrie in New Orleans. How the fuck is nobody putting David Ferrie in New Orleans? The most important guy, one of the most important guys in the whole thing, and one of the most obvious people, right? His whole story about the Winterland is jacked, and the Winterland is the key to everything. Owned by Lyndon Johnson, run by CIA spook Mary Boots Roberts, aka Joyce Rowland. First cousins Vincent Caltagirone Jr. I mean, this is an unbelievable set of circumstances, and no one had ever dug into the Winterland, and I can't really blame them for that, because in 2018, a Facebook group popped up called Winterland Memories from people who actually went to the Winterland, including Richard Rowland, who was the son of Roland Rowland. Posted all kinds of stuff, man. I was the only Kennedy researcher to be given access to it for some reason. They let me in, and I got over 100 pictures from the Winterland. I got rosters of sports teams, hockey teams, all kinds of stuff. I mean, a researcher's dream. So it was Richard Rowland who spilled the beans that Lyndon Johnson owned the Winterland. And that information had never been out there before. So that's pretty wild. And I can't really blame anybody for not having come up with that, because that was a modern era discovery,
Yeah, that's crazy. And again, when I talk about the Secret Service, just to go to touch on that point about their ineptitude, and just how, I mean, I honestly believe that. I mean, so what's your take on Clint Hill? I mean, like, I feel like the guy was kind of genuine when it came to really caring, and I mean, I feel like he was just not part of what that whole thing was about.
I don't know, but the odds of him not being in on it, and then he happened to run to the president's limo where he would be out of eyeshot of seeing what was going on in the Secret Service car. I just don't buy that, and I don't buy it because when you look at McIntyre #1, there is a major anomaly that I have a theory on that I'm pretty confident is correct. I can't say 100%, but when you look at McIntyre photo #1, it is clear to me that Clint Hill is already on top of Jackie because his head is over the side of the limousine. You can see his head hanging over the side. There's a man standing in the back of that limousine with a rifle. I mean, there is. I don't know how else to describe. I've looked at the picture for hundreds of hours just staring at it. I've had people look at it. I've analyzed it to death. And I can't come to another conclusion. There's a man standing in the back of the president's limo, with a rifle. There are witnesses who say that they saw Greer pull the limo over and pick somebody up on the other side of the knoll. So, to me, it would make sense that he picked up Valenti on the other side of the knoll. He's captured in McIntyre photo #1. Then, if you go through the photographs, you'll notice that the lead car with Decker and all those guys, they're doing like a game of leapfrog with the limousine. And the reason I think they did this was to give the Secret Service car enough opportunity to slow down or stop for Valenti to make his way to the Secret Service car, where he's clearly photographed in McIntyre #2. So that's my take on that.
Well,
And so if you can pull off all that stuff and keep Clint Hill out of the loop, that's the miracle.
yeah, no, it seems like everybody, yeah. I mean, you'd had to have some sort of knowledge, maybe, I don't know. I don't know even how to explain from that angle. I mean, you'd want to talk to Vince Palomaro when it comes to,
Oh, I've tried. He blocked
to
me after I posted that once. I responded to him one time. I posted the photograph of McIntyre #2, and he blocked me instantly. That's what I get.
really.
That's what I get from every Kennedy researcher. Not one of them wants to talk to me. Not fucking one. Not one. Because they don't want to
Hmm.
hear the truth. They don't want to hear anything I have to say, no matter how logical it is. Because they've been
Hmm.
fucking doing the same shit for 50 years. I have a feeling they think their grift will come to an end, but it won't. Trust me. I have a lifetime worth of material in front of me to work through. You know.
Interesting. Interesting. So another thing I want, I know we're jumping
That's
around
fine.
on this. I want to go back to the movie theater and the importance about the movie theater. Now, in your humble opinion, do you believe that Oswald did pay for a ticket
Yeah,
and
100%.
and bought popcorn
Yep.
and walked in, talked to um, his handler,
Yep.
which was the pregnant lady,
Correct.
and so the moving around, the witnesses said that he was moving around specifically all over the
Yep.
place.
Jack Davis.
Now we're
Jack Davis was the main witness for that. And Jack Davis was an 18-year-old kid. And he said Oswald came and first sat down directly in front of him, but within like 30 seconds got up and then sat directly next to him. And he was like, what the hell's what's wrong with this guy? And he watched Oswald do that 2 or 3 more times before he sat down next to the pregnant woman. And Jack Davis told the FBI that he was clearly looking for somebody that he didn't know. That's what he told them. And if that guy who's just a layman at 18 years old can come up with that, that's obviously what he was doing, you know? So, but the pregnant woman, there was a pregnant woman seen at the Payne's residence a week before the assassination. I've been unable to identify her. I've identified 2 pregnant women in New Orleans. One was a friend of Carrie Thornley's. Um, God, which one was it? I forget. I don't remember which one it was, but it wasn't Jessica Luck, but it was one of those girls that he knew in New Orleans. And you have the one who was dating Perry Russo. What was her name? Sandra Moffat. Sandra Moffat gave birth in August, so it couldn't have been her. And Marina gave birth in October, so it couldn't have been her. And so I'm still on the hunt for this pregnant woman.
what's interesting too is you mentioned Tammy True, and I actually saw her last video that she had posted on YouTube, and she pretty much has a straightforward forward story, which makes me really question her involvement with things. And I think she talked about how Jack, you know, really wanted to, cover for. I mean, he wanted to have revenge for Jackie and all this. The whole
Right,
bullshit
right.
story that they have out there. Um, you mentioned there was something a little bit more into what Tammy True was doing with Ruby that I'd like for you to explain about
Well,
that.
all I know is she was supposed to have run a safe house where some Cubans were staying. That's all I know. I'm still looking for a safe house in North Oak Cliff because after Seymour and Lawrence Howard flee from the book depository in the Green Nash Rambler, they head to Oak Cliff. Um, William Seymour will go to the Tidy Lady Laundry, where he's seen there, where he talks on the phone in Mexican. And he leaves the green station wagon in the parking lot, but he's there by himself. So he had to stop at a safe house in North Oak Cliff and drop off the other guys before taking off. Why he went, well, so he left the green Nash Rambler station wagon in the parking lot of the Tidy Lady Laundry. He then walks south on North Clinton Street, which is puzzling to me. Within about 30 minutes, him and Seymour and Howard will end up at the aqueduct, where they're picked up in the plane where Robert Vincent sees them, where he gives the description of Oswald and the husky Latin guy, right? So sometime between 1:50 p.m.-ish, or 12:50 p.m.-ish, and 1:30, Seymour and Howard make their way to the plane to escape Dallas, and they head to the Air Force base at, I think it was like Santa Fe, or it was in New Mexico somewhere, which makes perfect sense because they were on their way to Phoenix. At least Seymour was. Seymour was from Phoenix. He lived in Phoenix at the time. And so that's a perfect way for them to get out of there, get right to hop out of Dallas and go right to an Air Force base. So that means there's got to be some kind of records of this flight, the flight from Dallas that Vincent had written about. There's got to be records on that. There's pilots who flew the plane, right? So that's all stuff that we're never going to get, right?
Yeah, exactly. Which that's interesting. I mean, a friend of mine actually mentioned Barry Seal, but I don't think that was his era of time. Then maybe he was really young at that particular
I
time.
haven't been able to
Like, he was
connect
one of
Barry
the
Seal to
pilots.
like anything because there were no flights out of Dallas except for the Air Force flight that took Seymour and Howard. Everyone else drove out. So you got like Lenny Patrick from Chicago, Dave Yaris living in Miami, works for the Chicago mob, runs things down there. Both of those guys got they were being tracked by the FBI. FBI loses track of them a couple days or a week before the assassination. Both of them turn up a week after the assassination in Chicago. And so they were clearly there. I believe it was Dave Yaris, who was captured in the Nix film, who was originally edited out from it between the pergola and the fence. And so those guys definitely drove out because remember, you have this brings us to the David Leon Miller stuff. And this stuff is stuff I haven't written about in the book because it's somewhat speculative, but all the pieces are there. So it kind of makes sense to me. And also, Brian Dawson came to the same conclusion on this stuff. So I'll go ahead and I'll tell you anyway. The Marion Meharg files, which are super important, they talk about a guy named David Leon Miller and his brother Isidore Max Miller. And he tries to pin being one of the shooters as being David Leon Miller. Okay, so but the problem is David Leon Miller and his brother Isidore, they had moved to Atlanta a couple months before the assassination. Then you have driving through the parking lot behind the grassy knoll, seen by Lee Bowers. You got what? You had not the Impala, but you had another car with a Georgia license plate on it, right? So to me, this all makes perfect sense. Dave Yaris and his associate, David Leon Miller, whose identity he assumed when he came to Dallas, because David Leon Miller and Isidore Max Miller allegedly rented a place from Bertha Cheek right next to the Carousel Club where they stayed for a couple days. Okay. Then on top of that, you've got Murray Miller staying at the cabana the night before. Murray Miller is not a real person. Okay. Murray Miller is 100% an alias for Dave Yaris. Is the alias he used to run the Teamsters down in Miami. Murray Miller is not a real person. It's Dave Yaris. So I connected the dots on the David Leon Miller, Isidore Max Miller stuff. And when you dig into Isidore Max Miller, it says that he's the top bookmaker in Dallas. Well, no, he's not. Lenny Patrick was running the books in Dallas from Chicago, right? So there you have another connection between these Millers and Lenny Patrick and Dave Yaris. And then you have like the series of phone calls in the days leading up to the assassination, right? Jack Ruby calls Robert Bernard Baker. Robert Bernard Baker calls Dave Yaris. Dave Yaris calls Lenny Patrick. Yeah, bullshit. Those are all alibi phone calls because those guys were all in Dallas.
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/PODKATZ13. Just go to Indeed.com/PODKATZ13 KATZ13 right now. And support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
And so, as far as a flight out, there was no need for any other pilots. These motherfuckers just drove out casually, like nothing happened, which is what they should have done, right? The one person who really I'm scratching my head over what they were doing is Bruce Ray Carlin, who was Little Lynn's husband. That guy, when the assassination happened, was in New Orleans. He spent that whole weekend driving back and forth between Houston, New Orleans, Houston, and Dallas. And he drove like 1,500 miles around a little small area that weekend. What the fuck was he doing? I have no idea. But
Yeah, all
interesting.
this stuff is interesting. I mean, I just, and like you mentioned in the beginning of this when we started, is that everything either seems to happen by coincidence or it's just. I mean, it's crazy how these events just seem to piece together like during that particular time. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, like it blows my mind. Like whenever I hear a new piece of information, I'm like, okay, well, I can connect it with that. You know what I mean?
Right. So the one guy I'm really still trying to put in fucking Dallas is Clay Shaw. I know Clay Shaw was in Dallas because I had a conversation with Ryan Dawson about it, and he was able to successfully put him in Dallas with a guy named Erwin Heyman. Erwin Heyman was one of the top guys in the Jewish agency in Switzerland, and so I've been unable to connect those dots. And trust me, me and my guys have pulled everything on Erwin Heyman. What a scumbag that guy is. He was tied up with fake banks in Mexico City and weird stuff too. So, but yeah, I can't seem to put Clay Shaw in Dallas for the life of me. No matter what I do, I've read. I haven't really done the full deep dive in the Shaw files. There's like 5,000 pages of Shaw files. So, and most of them have to do with like his stuff that he was doing in Italy, and like before the assassination and stuff, and all his work with he worked with the OSS under Charles Thrasher. So that was where he got his start in intelligence. I don't know if you've read or seen the documentary by Michelle Mehta on CMC and the Mossad assassination station or whatever it's called. It's the longest fucking name ever. That's the greatest. What's one of the greatest discoveries in all of Kennedy research ever. Michelle Mehta is Italian, so we don't hear much about him. He's got 3 or 4 books on the assassination. The guy is a genius. His work on CMC is priceless. He 100% connected all the dots between the Israelis, the mob, Numek, the assassination. Like he spelled it out so perfectly. And he's got dozens of names in there, like European, Italian names, all connected to these secret societies and stuff that were connected to it also. And then that all connects to like the Galen network and Otto Skorzeny, who Hank Albarelli put in Dallas. And he's captured in one of the photographs. I'll show it to you in the research chat. But Otto Skorzeny, clear as fuck in Dealey Plaza that day. And that connects back to Galen and all this stuff. And honestly, I think if there's any one person who like architected this thing, it was probably Galen himself. He was the mastermind of tradecraft and assassination and dirty tricks and all that stuff. So,
amongst it blows my mind, man. Just about and especially some of the other stuff that you've told me off the air, which we'll just kind of keep off the air. But that just blows my mind, man. I mean, like,
well, there's
and
a major European component to this. The CIA's connections to that whole post World War II Nazi network. Those guys were involved with Permindex and stuff too. Halmar Schacht, Halmar Schacht was involved with Permindex, and Halmar Schacht actually was on a fucking talk show with Marguerite Oswald once. Crazy, right?
Yeah, that's just nuts, man.
I know, totally nuts.
So I think it's important to when we're looking around, again, I think I always talk about, people really want to dig into this, like to do research on this particular, the assassination. It's really important to just from a surface level look at exactly the hour just after the assassination, and and the timing and how everything was going on. The arrest and everything with Buell Frazier being in the interrogation room, and so I hate to sound like kind of a diplomatic person when it comes to being on the surface about this, but your advice to like new researchers that would go in. I mean, is that a good way to start to go into literally the hour afterwards? I mean, because
Well, the only thing I tell people who are new researchers is don't read people's books. Go right to the documents. Like wait years before you go to anyone's books. Use books to fill in your own gaps. Don't try to create your thesis off someone's book. Not even fucking my book. Not even mine. Go read the documents yourself. You know what I mean? That's where all the answers were, and that's how I got started. I made sure because I knew there was so much propaganda and bullshit out there. You
Yeah.
know, so I was
A
like,
lot
I'm
of
just gonna read this. I went right to the source material, and I was like, fuck it, I'm just gonna do this the hard
yeah.
way.
Yeah, and that's really super important. Now, the residuals of the assassination, obviously, I don't think it's repairable today. I think it's still going on, and I wanted to talk to you briefly on this. The war that I guess Trump declared a ceasefire today, but I just want to talk about how the assassination directly relates to what happened, this past couple of weeks, and
Oh, that's easy. That's easy. The whole fucking story of the 20th century is the story of Israel. From 1896 to the end of 1999, that's the story of fucking Israel. And when you come to
Mhm.
understand that the story of the 20th century is the story of Israel, Kennedy was just a fucking bump in the road. Nothing more. There's been I don't know, I couldn't even tell you how many assassinations they've committed. Hundreds. You can go on Wikipedia and look at it. Israeli assassinations. There's like a list of over 200. Going up to like last year. It's crazy.
Oh yeah, a lot of it. Yeah,
But people who ignore the Israeli aspect ignore all of history, because nobody will ever understand Kennedy unless they understand that Israel is, and Zionism is a plot to take over the world. I don't want to hear about this, bullshit, right of Jewish self-sovereignty bullshit. It's a plot to take over the world. Go read Herzl's diaries. He had no respect for fucking anybody. They talked about getting a piece of land and then eventually taking over the whole country. Right? I mean, this was all in the plot from the beginning, and so Kennedy was going to end all that. Period. Like when you come to understand how he really felt, and when you come to understand that he was getting almost sometimes daily briefings on Dimona and activity there, starting as soon as he got into office in early '61. Like I have a list of briefings that he got on the Israeli nuclear program. It's like 10 pages long, and it shows all these dates and packages of information that he received. It's wild. He hated these Israelis because all they ever do is lie. And that's a direct quote from John Kennedy. All they ever do is lie. And so when you come to understand that, and that they'll do anything to maintain a state, and then, well, they got their state, but that ain't good enough, is it? So that's what's going on today. Iran is the last domino to fall in order for them to enact their Greater Israel Project, some biblical nonsense of people who had a culture that they stole. So that's my take on everything that's going on today. Trust me, anything that goes wrong in the world, Israel is behind. Or what I call the greater global Jewish establishment, because it's not just Israel. They're just a link in a chain. I mean, it's a chain that involves AIPAC and B'nai B'rith and the Jewish Agency and the literally 100 million fucking Jewish organizations out there. It's what I call the global Jewish establishment. And that's who killed Kennedy. And that's who's been running the world and destroying America on purpose ever since. So, but I don't know if I can trust Trump to fix anything because he's a fucking liar. I mean, he's been proven to be a liar. This strike on Iran is the worst thing he could have possibly done. Because I was making all the excuses for him in the world, but this is, even with all the Israel shit that he's been doing, which I despise. He he lied, and I just don't buy that he's there to save us anymore at all. You know.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to, unfortunately, I tend to try to be, I don't know, I, I don't want to be like a chicken off this, but I'm just, I tend to stay in my lane because I'm not really informed enough to know about this particular topic, other than the fact that I don't think that we should be going to war if it's not necessary. And I feel like this whole thing was not necessary.
Correct.
I feel like, you know, when it looks like, when you speculate about uranium and you speculate about things that are, um, I don't know for sure if they actually had a uranium or a nuclear, thing going on over there. I have no idea. I'm just some
Right.
guy that lives in the Northwest.
Well,
So
here's the thing with Iran: for many, 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 many years, decades, the battle against them having nuclear at all was because they have to use a huge portion of their own oil because of all the sanctions they're under, and therefore, if they have nuclear power that free across the country, widespread, that frees up all that oil to hit the market. So that's a problem. Also, that's a big problem for OPEC and anyone who wants to see oil stay at close to $100 a barrel. That's a major
mm,
problem. So I think that's a big reason why internationally Israel is backed in their crusade against Iran. There's always multiple reasons for things. It's never just one reason. There's always a whole
Of course,
set of reasons.
Of course. Yeah, of course. I mean, like there are multiple reasons for a lot of things. I mean, like especially when if we circle back to the Kennedy assassination again, like he was an advocate for peace. I mean, like he was talking with Khrushchev about making peace and seeing a world where we would be able to have peaceful outcomes, no wars like in Vietnam, and just
And that's why the
different
right wing in America.
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/PODKATZ13. Just go to Indeed.com/PODKATZ13 right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
Thought he was a communist because they were very extreme. It was like communism's evil. You don't negotiate with that, and if you do, you're a communist. And that's kind of that was their attitude.
And how easy was it to plant that on Oswald by him being an associate with like he was affiliated with being in the Soviet Union, and so to tell the public of that he had ties to the Soviet Union. The public was extremely naive. They believed the news, they believed the radio, and look, there you go. I mean, they don't need to question anything else. And then you got dipshits like Dan Abram and these other guys that are out there today still holding on to the Arlene Specter tree, which is just ridiculous.
Yeah. And so I find the study of Oswald to be way, way more fascinating than the study of the Kennedy assassination. Maybe it's just that I spent so long on it, that the transition is refreshing. But the life of Oswald is the biggest holy shit spy story I've ever read. It's truly unbelievable the stuff they tried to pull off, and Robert Oswald being the linchpin in the middle, keeping it all together, which is exactly what he did. So his interactions with like the other Marguerite and the other Lee started, from what I can tell, the photo at the Bronx Zoo. That whole trip, man, the whole era of New York is wild. Like Robert Oswald testified to all kinds of stuff that definitely never happened, or that we're not supposed to know happened. He testified that Lee Oswald went to fucking PS 44 in Manhattan. All the school records say he went to PS 44 in the Bronx.
Yeah.
Crazy. John Armstrong thinks that Oswald went that semester to Beauregard. I disagree with him there. Because I think he's basing his decision off of the records, and the records are mostly fake. So you can't really base a solid conclusion off of fake records. You know what I mean? Because Oswald's school records are definitely a compilation with a lot of missing.
And would you say, just off that analysis itself, that for being a 24-year-old, he essentially lived a full life for being a 24-year-old man when he died?
I don't know. I've had this someone asked me that before, and so I don't know, man, because when you look at Oswald's life, he had a terrible childhood. He really did. I mean, he never had much stability. The only stability he ever had was when he was in like the latter half of 4th grade, 5th grade, and 6th grade. He was at the Victor Street address, and he was going to Ridgely West. That was the most stability that guy ever had in his freaking life. From there, he goes to New York, and he's bounced all around between John Pick's apartment, the apartment on Sheridan, then 179th in the Bronx. I mean, like, so this guy never, he bounced around. He went to like 14 different schools or something crazy like that. I mean, not to mention that in 1945, he had a mastoidectomy on his left ear. And when you get into Oswald's psych reports from Youth House, it becomes pretty obvious that his lack of hearing in his left ear is what caused him to be the withdrawn person that he was. That, combined with bouncing around different schools, never making any long-term friends, that's what created the Oswald withdrawn persona that we're told about. But of course, the Oswald who we all know, who got arrested on November 22nd, he didn't have a scar behind his left ear because he never had a mastoidectomy. So, you get run into some interesting conflicts like that too, right? Because Lee Oswald was in the Civil Air Patrol and for about 2 or 3 weeks in the summer of 1955, starting in July. But everyone tries to say that David Ferrie knew Lee Oswald in New Orleans. Well, that ain't the same person. So clearly, that Lee Oswald did not know David Ferrie. You know what I mean? So most people get lost when I start talking about the Oswald stuff because most people aren't exposed to it, and most people shun the work of John Armstrong because John Armstrong came to some really stupid conclusions. He did. He came to really stupid conclusions when it came to the assassination. He intertwined these two Lee Oswalds all throughout the assassination plot, which was ridiculous. You're not going to do that if you're the CIA. Once you pull off your defection to Russia, which was the whole point of the lifelong operation, you're done. You get a new name and identity and you move on, right? So the real Lee Oswald had nothing to do with the assassination in New Orleans or none of that stuff post 1962, or I'd say post 59. I'd say in 59, he disappeared off the face of the earth. But that stuff is all very real. It's all extremely real. And my new book is going to show every single last document and detail and photograph proving all this stuff. And Robert Oswald and Lillian Moret were in on it. Marilyn Dorothea Moret, she was in on it. I even have a feeling that John Marshall Moret was in on this thing. So, because there's a time in 1950, what year is it? Oswald's in Atsugi, then he goes to Taiwan. And so this is like 57, 58, which is when we have the first sightings of Oswald at Pfister Dental Lab, right? Of course, the official story says he worked there in 56 before he went into the Marines, but that's not possible. Everyone who was interviewed from Pfister Dental Lab recalled Oswald working there in 57, 58. However, I can show through the duty roster in the Marines, the daily records, and the pay records that Oswald was in two different places at once in Atsugi. Like he was in Atsugi and Taiwan at the exact same time. And someone was back there working at Pfister Dental Lab using the name of Lee Oswald. That person was that person who used the name Lee Oswald was staying at the Senator Hotel, or a boarding house next to the Senator Hotel. And Palmer McBride had actually been brought to the Senator Hotel with Oswald and met Oswald's mother. Now, this is where it gets really interesting, and in a place that John Armstrong really screwed up. John Armstrong has the photograph of the woman that Palmer McBride met, and he claims that this woman is the false Marguerite Oswald, but he is dead wrong. The photograph that he showed to Palmer McBride actually turns out to be a photograph of Lillian Moret. So when Palmer McBride was working with Lee Oswald at Pfister Dental Lab, and Lee Oswald brought him home to the boarding house next to the Senator Hotel, he met Lillian Moret. So why would Lillian Moret, who lives on French Street, be staying at the Senator Hotel with somebody named Lee Oswald working at Pfister Dental Lab when I can prove that there's two Oswalds still in Marines in Atsugi at that exact same time? Why would they do this?
Let's bring it in real quick because I want to jump ahead to Mexico City because and the reports of Oswald being there. Is there a possibility there may have been more than two? Like we're talking like 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe multiple?
Oh, it's always possible, but I can tell you the person who went to the embassies was Carrie Thornley, like unquestionably Carrie Thornley. Carrie Thornley, because Oswald was still in New Orleans on the 26th of September. So Oswald was supposed to have been on a bus crossing the border the 26th, and he arrived 27th at the hotel, the 27th at 10 o'clock in the morning. On the 26th, Oswald was still in New Orleans, where we have the documents where he closed out his P.O. box and left a forwarding address to the Payne residence. So he wasn't on any bus to Mexico City. And he didn't speak broken Russian, or we don't know. I still can't figure out the Russian thing. When he went to Russia, do you know Oswald never spoke Russian when he went to Russia?
No, I did not know that.
None of the friends who knew him there said he didn't speak Russian. All the friends who knew him there said he didn't speak Russian. How the hell are you going to speak Russian fluently in the Marines and then go to Russia, not speak Russian, and then you come back from Russia and you speak fluent Russian again? See, that's another thing that doesn't make sense at all.
Yeah, and that would obviously debunk the crazy, wild stuff that Judith Very Baker says.
She's a total nutcase. She's a total fraud. Like I don't even acknowledge her. Like, yeah, the only thing that she ever said that ever possibly rang true with me was she said that Carrie Thornley was in love with Marina. I don't know how she'd know that. I don't know how she'd know Carrie Thornley. I don't know how she'd know Oswald. None of the stuff she says about Oswald seems to fit any of the timeline stuff we know about him. But hey, that's par for the course at this point, you know.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting because again, you mentioned earlier about theories and people staking claim to things. Now, I want to kind of go into a very interesting topic here. We've talked about Roscoe White before, and obviously that you said that's a dead end, but I'm interested in hearing your take about that, especially with the locker that he had with the cables and the information that his son Ricky provided.
Yeah, it's
I
weird
know.
stuff. I can't seem to. It doesn't connect to anything. Like I can't. I know he got hired for a very brief time after the assassination. Was it? I think. And he worked there for like a month or something like that, right? At Dallas Police. But it's strange. But I can't connect that to any other fluid part of the assassination. So the backyard photographs were definitely fakes. It was definitely Kerry Thornley. Even what was his name? Brochure slept with Kerry Thornley, and Brochure told Garrison clearly the man in the photograph, he knows that body, and that body is Kerry Thornley. That's what Brochure told to Garrison. Marina swears she took those pictures, but we all know Oswald never had the rifle. Like never. The whole thing was fake. The money order is fake. The money order we're told that he sent is a fake. And we know this because it has ink bleed through. That when you stamp the front of it, it's got the date stamp on the front. That ink bled through, and you can see it visible on the back of the money order. That
Well,
is a
and
fake. That is a
I would
fake
agree.
because money orders back then were on cardstock. They were not done on paper. So they
Right,
faked it on
right.
paper. So
Right. Well, and I don't know if you watched that Brokaw interview that she did, and she basically just laid it out like, she really didn't even have a chance to even explain her truth at the particular time. So I don't even know if she even said she took that backyard photo. I mean, like maybe, if you can corroborate that.
yeah, oh yeah, she said she did, and yeah, she says she did, and they have the camera and all that stuff, but it's totally false. That the photograph was doctored. I mean, it was totally
Oh,
fake.
absolutely.
Kerry
I know that.
Thornley. So once you put together the dots, it was Kerry Thornley in Mexico City. Then you follow the trail. Nobody saw Oswald on a bus leaving out of Mexico City. Nobody, and so he was never on a bus. There was a bus ticket bought, but the ticket that he bought was empty. So nobody had named Oswald ever got on a bus to leave Mexico City to go out to Laredo or wherever they went. But then you have about 3 days of sightings of Oswald driving a car with a woman who had a baby. Okay, there's only one person that could be, and that is definitely Marina. And once you realize that Marina and Oswald and Thornley were all seen together in New Orleans by the neighbors saw Thornley over at Oswald's place so often, they were confused as to who she was married to. Okay.
Mm.
So we have the concrete witnesses seeing the relationship there. And so then when you realize Kerry Thornley went to Mexico, it becomes obvious that it was him and Marina who went all through Alice, Texas. He tried to get a job at the radio station. He was seen at a diner asking about employment opportunities. And then you have Oswald on October 3rd allegedly staying at the YMCA. I don't know if I totally buy that or not. I don't know if I buy that Oswald stayed at the YMCA on the 3rd, but he most certainly didn't go to Mexico City. He didn't go, trolloping around through Alice, Texas. There's a couple other small cities that people saw him in on the way back there. So it's really interesting stuff. But Marina was in on the setup from the jump. I believe she was a Russian spy. They knew Oswald was a spy, so they sent him back with a spy. And I think that pissed off a lot of people in intelligence. Like, what the hell are you doing bringing this woman back here?
Yeah.
And they had to
Yeah.
deal with her right away. So we don't have any documentation really, of Oswald being debriefed or any of that stuff. I mean, he spent a couple days in New York City before going to Fort Worth. Some stuff must have happened up there because he was in touch with all kinds of like aid organizations and the Red Cross. And like, who the fuck comes from Moscow to New York and calls the Red Cross for money? Like, it's just weird. You know what I mean? And
Well,
he
yeah.
did.
Not only that, but he also talked to John Connolly about, was it receiving benefits or was it talking about being honorably discharged?
That
I
was all
have
on the
no.
discharge stuff, but I find more interesting the relationship with Fred Korth, who facilitated every step of Oswald's getting out of the Marines, getting back from the Soviet Union. Fred Korth was a part of Oswald's life going back to the divorce between Ekdahl and Marguerite Oswald, because Fred Korth, who would go on to be the Secretary of the Navy before John Connolly, he was the one who handled Ekdahl's side of the divorce from Marguerite. Then you have Fred Korth popping up several times in the old Oswald story, like the house at 2220 Thomas Place. 2220 Thomas Place was owned by a woman named Mary McCarthy, who was a very close personal friend of Fred Korth. And we can say with certainty that the false Marguerite lived there no less than 3 times, going back to 1945. So this again brings up the real estate network. I keep coming up with what appears to be a covert series of safe houses, including 2220 Thomas Place, Robert Oswald's house on Davenport, 126 Exchange Place. Like, all these addresses are suspiciously convenient for these people to move into. Like, for me, the Davenport one is the biggest shocker. So Robert Oswald eventually lives on Davenport in Fort Worth. He buys the house in like July of 57. Oswald is seen at that house when he's supposed to be in New Orleans in 1955, the January to June semester 1955. Oswald's supposed to be at Beauregard. I have multiple witnesses who put him at Monig Junior High School. I have a photograph of the class photo with Oswald in it. You can't really tell it's Oswald, but you can see the hairline is identical to the Beauregard photos, which is confusing unto itself. So the Beauregard stuff is interesting because you have Oswald starts Beauregard January of 54, and he meets a woman named Myra DeRoos LaRue, who is his homeroom teacher, but she's really a girls' physical education teacher. And she becomes friends with Oswald, and she's there when the piano fell on him. And she then drives him home in early 54 to 126 Exchange Place. But the official story is that they didn't move in there till June of 55. Right. But then I have letters from Marguerite to John Pick in October and November of 54, where she uses 126 Exchange Place as the return address. So clearly we're dealing with the two Oswalds at one address. This is the second time they've done this. They did this at 101 San Saba when Marguerite Oswald and Lee lived there for about 9 months up till Thanksgiving 47. And then Marguerite and Lee will move in there summer of 48, right, with John Pick and Robert Oswald. So they did this and then we have the neighbor, Georgia Bell, who identified the false Marguerite as being the Marguerite who lived there, who was a nurse. But Marguerite Oswald, the real Marguerite Oswald, was never trained as a nurse. That's the crazy part.
So this is crazy because to me it sounds like they were monitoring Oswald like
They were. So here's the great
like
example. In 1955, Oswald, well, this isn't official story stuff.
so but real quick,
Sure.
Corey, why would they be monitoring him back that early? I mean, that just kind of blows my mind. I don't understand unless it had something to do with intelligence.
Yeah, this was an intelligence identity transfer operation. That's Oswald's whole life starting in 45. The earliest incidents I have are in 45. And then you have
isn't
like,
that sort of like isn't that kind of on par with like a grooming type aspect about you
yep.
pick somebody and you groom them to
Yep.
that's insane.
This is an intelligence-based family. And this becomes brutally obvious when you study Lillian Moret and Marilyn Moret. They're spooks. I found documents showing that both of them flew in September 54. Marilyn Moret gets her passport July of 54. Then her and her mother fly to an Air Force base in Bermuda, Kindley Air Force Base. I have the documents I found on like Ancestry or something like that. We weren't stationed. We didn't have a presence there in 1954. We kind of sort of did, but it wasn't like a real station. It was really it was housing British troops, and there was some other troops there. And the American intelligence or American Air Force presence there was very minimal. So why the fuck are Lillian and Marilyn flying to an Air Force base in 1954? And why didn't it come up in the Warren Commission? And then I have a document showing that in 1955, Lillian Moret flew not only to Canada, but she also flew to Cuba in 1955. Why wasn't this brought up at the Warren Commission? They never asked her about any of this stuff. She's just supposed to be some fucking housewife who just sits at home all day. Like, literally. But what's she doing flying to Cuba in 55? And then no one ever talks about it. Like, this is the stuff that I need answers for. This, to me, is more important than anything. Like, this will connect us to who the real handlers in the Oswald operation are. Of which I'm convinced Fred Korth is most certainly one of them. So,
yeah.
But what's the connection between this Oswald operation and the assassination? Your guess is as good as mine. Other than somebody was involved in both because they had to have known about Oswald to know to set him up, right? But I think that they thought they were solving multiple problems by having him killed, when really they opened Pandora's box. It was a big mistake setting up Oswald.
Yes, and I can agree with that. I mean, I think if they were able, okay, and that's one thing I just want to touch about also is Tippett. I mean, and was he supposed to kill Oswald? I mean, was that his particular role? Was he
That I don't
supposed to
know,
kill Oswald?
but I know he was waiting for that bus. He sat at that Gloco station for 15 minutes. He leaves Dealey Plaza. He's seen by Velma talking to David Ferrie behind the book depository. From there, they go meet behind a building. From there, they head over to Tippett goes to the Gloco and he waits for like 15 minutes. That bus he was waiting for was the bus Oswald was alleged to have gotten on, but Oswald didn't get on any bus that day. But that's still the same bus line. Happened to be the same bus line that Helen Markham was leaving her house to get on, which also helps isolate the timing of it. But yeah, he was. I
Yeah.
believe he was supposed to meet somebody getting off that bus, but I think he was set up because I think the people who did this knew nobody was going to be getting off of that bus because nobody got on the fucking bus in the first place. The whole story about Oswald and the bus falls apart when you study the statements of everybody involved. From Cecil
It's
McWaters to Mary Bledsoe. Yeah, Mary Bledsoe wasn't even on the fucking bus. Her whole statement was coached in a lie. She talks about seeing Oswald on the bus with his brown shirt with the hole in the elbow and the buttons ripped off and stuff. But that didn't happen for another hour and a half after the bus ride, right? When he's at the Texas Theater. So her testimony was a lie, all coached. She read from notes, and the notes were prepared by Forrest Sorrells. So yeah.
that's interesting.
But
That is just
Tippett was
when you talk about Markham real
mhm.
quick. Markham, the quote unquote witness of the shooting. I mean, she just was.
Yeah, she's a mess.
I mean, a mess. And when I think I watched her interviews with Mark Lane and just how she was so easy to be
Mm-hmm.
intimidated and how she would change things and just she's about as unreliable as it was.
Yeah, so the only three witnesses you need to hear from are Akilah Clemens, Frank Wright, and Doris Holen. Those three witnesses tell the entire tale of what happened to Tippett. He was shot by two men, not by one. One of the
Mm-hmm.
guys was wearing a blue suit with a coat that ended just above his hands, and he was driving a gray early 50s Plymouth, the same Plymouth seen by Velma behind the book depository. David Ferrie was one of the two shooters on the Knoll, or possibly the Knoll in the tunnel. I'm still working that out. I got my guys on that one right now. And so, because Valenti might have been in the tunnel, I'm starting to lean in that direction because that would explain why Ed Hoffman never saw him. But from there, David Ferrie heads to the Tippett shooting where he's parked behind Tippett facing the opposite direction. Okay. So after Kerry Thornley is driven to the Tippett shooting by Westbrook and Croy, he starts talking to him through the triangular window. And you got to remember, earlier that morning at the Top 10 record store, Tippett went into Top 10 to use the phone, and allegedly Oswald, quote unquote, was there that morning. But was it Oswald? Of course it wasn't Oswald. Oswald's still in Fort Worth all morning by my calculations. So to me, it was pretty obvious the man that Tippett saw at the Top 10 that morning was Kerry Thornley, not Oswald, because Kerry Thornley was the one impersonating Oswald all over Dallas. And so from there, you have Tippett gets shot 3 times by Thornley. As per Doris Holen, the other guy who was there was stocky, wearing a blue suit, black felt hat, just like at the Tippett shooting. I mean, just like at the Knoll, seen by Ed Hoffman. And David Ferrie delivers the final coup de grace to Tippett, and then he reloads his gun on the scene and drops the shells. Why would he do that? You don't drop shells from a revolver. The whole point of a revolver is you don't drop the shells, right? So why would he do that? Why would he be reloading his gun like Akilah Clemens said he was? Well, obviously, because he had to plant the shells, right? So I kind of feel like that gun at some point in time made its way to the cops before they got to the Texas Theater, right? That would only
Mm-hmm.
make sense.
Mm-hmm.
So, but from there, I believe that he goes to us up on Belmont in Fort Worth, the house that Kenneth Glenn Wilson got arrested out of, that David Wayne House was on his way to. You know that story, right?
Mm-hmm.
So David Wayne House, I'm pretty convinced, was up on the bridge with Robert Bernard Baker. And Robert Bernard Baker didn't end up shooting, but there was witnesses who saw a rifle up on the overpass. From there, we have a witness who saw a black car take off from behind the grass, from behind the overpass.
Well, there's literally a photo of that. We talked about that
Yeah,
last
yeah,
time.
I've seen it.
There's a photo of either a shooter or a spotter that's on that overpass, and there's people off to the left looking at that. I mean, I know you saw that photo prior,
Yeah.
but my God, that photo blew my mind. I just could not believe what I was seeing.
The big fat guy in the white shirt on the overpass is Robert Bernard Baker. That's a 350-pound guy. And there's only one 350-pound guy in the cast of characters who was making alibi phone calls the night before. You know what I mean? So,
Really?
yes,
Wow.
yes. And I believe it was David Wayne House who took his rifle and got into a black car, left there. From there, he does a car swap somewhere because by the time he gets to the house on Belmont, he's in a green car. So, at that house, when the cops show up there, they call out that there's also a light colored Ford Falcon on scene. The light colored Ford Falcon is the vehicle driven by David Ferrie when he gets to Hammond, Louisiana by Thomas
Hmm.
Compton.
Right.
So, from what I've concluded, after Ferrie is involved in the Tippit shooting, he flees to the house on Belmont in Fort Worth. He ditches the car, which is owned by Carl Mather,
Hmm.
of Collins Radio, and he picks up the light colored Ford Falcon and he makes his way that night to Hammond, Louisiana, where we have a document in the Garrison files that a student at Southeastern told Garrison that Ferrie hid out that night in the dorm room, which totally throws the whole story about him being in court with Carlos Marcello out the window, him going to pick up, Melvin Coffee, quote unquote. Melvin Coffee is just an alias for Leighton Martins. And he picks up Bo Boof, and then they head, to Vinton to talk to, what was his name, Marion James Johnson, and then they head to Houston where they go to the Alamo Motel. There is an incident at the Alamo Motel I need to do some more digging into because, if I'm not mistaken, they actually, I remember this from a document. I have to go dig it up. They actually drove directly to the Winterland, and they did something at the Winterland before they went to the Alamo Motel. Now, this would totally jive with my idea that the short tramp, Vincent Calderon Jr., was driven from Houston back down to the Winterland because the Winterland was run by his first cousin, Mary Boots Roberts, and it was owned by Lyndon Johnson. And Vincent Calderon is also the former brother-in-law of Jack Valenti, who was married to Jack Valenti's sister. So to me, all these pieces kind of made sense. Why would they go to the Winterland? Well, to bring Vincent there, obviously. So they go to, allegedly, David Ferrie. It was not Ferrie, it's Sergio Arcacha. But they go to Houston and they allegedly stay at the Alamo Motel. Then they go to the Winterland and then they make a bunch of calls. But when you really analyze their behavior, what you'll find is that the Alamo Motel was directly next to another place, and David Ferrie had testified or said to the FBI they went to the Bel Air skating rink. Well, the Bel Air skating rink had been knocked down in 1959. There was no Bel Air skating rink. How the fuck did Dave Ferrie know about the Bel Air when there was no Bel Air? Not for at least 3 years, 4 years. So, but on top of the Bel Air was built the Gateway Swim and Skate. And the Gateway Swim and Skate would later go on to become the Downtown Houston YMCA. The Downtown Houston YMCA employed Vincent Calderon Jr., who sat on the board of directors of the YMCA scuba program. So, what does this tell me? The reason for the phone calls to the Gateway and the reason they visited the Gateway had nothing to do with scoping out an ice rink. It had to do 100% with Vincent Calderon Jr. What they were doing with him or why, I don't know, but he is the common link between all of those subjects. And then when you realize that the Winterland is just a CIA front owned by Lyndon Johnson, it becomes pretty par for the course at this point that the whole thing was another staged event,
Wow. A lot to really chew on when it comes to all that type of stuff, man.
Or
I
that's only the
mean,
beginning.
listen.
Because like
Oh no, dude, I'm totally,
like
it's just,
Roland isn't Roland. Everyone talks about Roland. That's not his name. His real name is Rulon Roland. Why they lied about it, I don't know. But he's married to Joyce Roland, who is really, AKA Mary Boots Roberts. Why Mary Boots Roberts felt the need to change her identity, before the assassination, I really don't understand.
well,
But
there's a lot of, like you said earlier, there's a lot of coincidences when it comes to things. So, I mean,
yeah,
we're talking probably millions of different coincidences that kind of add up to this. But, I think it's important to discuss also the quick movement of Hoover and how him and Johnson, yeah, and the CIA, they wanted to coordinate the lone gunman theory right away to
right,
sell the public.
right,
And and that's where I made a post the other day about Prouty. Now I know Prouty was full of shit most of the time, but I think one of the comments that he made specifically about when he was in New Zealand, getting that newspaper, like right away about the details about Oswald and everything like that. I mean, they really wanted to hammer this down worldwide. and just kind of bury it and leave it behind. Your take on that Mockingbird aspect of everything aligning together, with this one particular story, starting with the Mauser story, which we talked about last week, so we don't have to cover that, but just in general, about this lone gunman right away, just bury it behind us and let's go with that.
Well, you have to think Hoover was well aware of Oswald. I mean, what was it, 1960? So they have that memo from 60 where Hoover's talking about how someone might be using Oswald's identity or birth certificate or whatever. That document is largely taken out of context. They didn't have any specific information that somebody was doing that, but they had lost contact with Oswald. So by them even saying in their own document that they lost contact with Oswald, we can assume that they had contact with Oswald prior to that, right? So they were obviously in constant contact with him. And when they lost contact with him, the memo basically to Hoover initially stated, we've lost contact with Oswald. He has his birth certificate with him. So because he had his birth certificate with him and they lost contact with him, it was a big, question mark to them. And they're like, somebody could be using his identity. We don't know. That's the proper context of that document. They didn't have anything specific about somebody using his identity. That really won't occur until 61 at Bolton Ford, when Oswald is still over in the Soviet Union. But as far as Hoover goes, I need to bring this up because this is very important. One of Oswald's jobs, not on the official story, but one of the jobs that John Armstrong dug up was official. He's supposed to have worked at J.R. Michaels' company, doing like office work, and he allegedly only worked there for out of a 2-week period, he worked there 1 week, and he never came and got his check or nothing like that. When the FBI, the day after the assassination, the 23rd, they go to talk to J.R. Michaels' company, and they're laughing. They're like, we don't know what you're talking about. Oswald never worked here. And they said, you need to check your records for these dates. And they checked them for those dates, and they found Oswald's employment history at J.R. Michaels. Hoover knew about that when J.R. Michaels didn't know about that. That's fucking crazy. That means that Hoover was in the loop going back to at least 1955. With Oswald specifically.
No, obviously, I agree with that because again, there is documentation in 1960 with his concerns about. I mean, there is documentation. I mean, that's proven, that they were monitoring Oswald. So yeah, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me in 1955 they were monitoring him.
So another thing is interesting. A friend of mine, Diana Thomas, who is an Oswald researcher, also. She in going over all my stuff and the addresses, the chronological addresses I came up with, she found that almost every one of the addresses that Oswald lived at growing up was on the same street as either an orphanage or an asylum, usually Catholic or Lutheran. That I don't know what the relationship is here or if there is one at all, but that is a fascinating piece of data for me to think that that would have been a perfect place to coordinate, especially dealing with the identity of this other Marguerite Oswald, right? Because there's some indication that she had some psychological counseling. She made some statements to the Warren Commission about a lifetime of therapy or something like that. And this kind of correlates with some of my suspects on who that woman actually is. One person who I think is really important that nobody ever talks about is Pearl Claverie. I think when she died, her last name was Winfrey. This is Marguerite Oswald's sister, who died at the Jackson Mental Hospital in Louisiana in August of '63. For some reason, the whole Oswald Clinton story, something in the back of my mind tells me there's a connection between the Oswald Clinton voter registration stuff and Pearl Claverie's death at Jackson. And I say that because when you come to understand the Clinton incident, and it wasn't Oswald, it was Kerry Thornley, and you come to realize it was Kerry Thornley because of the series of events leading up to that. First, you have the incident at the barber shop, right, with the barber McGee, where Oswald never needed a haircut, but he goes in to get a haircut anyway. He tries to talk to him about getting a job at the, how do I go about getting a job at the Jackson Mental Institution up the road here? He goes, oh, you need to go talk to Reeves Morgan. Reeves Morgan is the local, representative. So then Oswald is seen going to Reeves Morgan's house, and he's driving a car with a woman and a baby in the back seat. Duh. Once again, we got Kerry Thornley and Marina Oswald, setting Oswald up. But this time, he's trying to get a job at the Jackson Mental Institution. Why the fuck is he doing that? In October of '63, Why is he trying to get a job at a place where his aunt died 3 months earlier? This never made any sense to me at all. Putting together the fact that it wasn't Oswald was kind of easy, but the why of the whole matter doesn't make any sense. I mean, it was all about getting a voter registration so he could be considered a constituent of Reeves Morgan, because then Reeves Morgan would give him a recommendation to the hospital to get the job. That's why he did the whole thing in the first place, because Reeves Morgan told me he needed to be a constituent. That's why the whole voter registration incident happened in the first place. But to me, him trying to attempt to get a job at Jackson and Pearl Clevery just died there like 2 months earlier, nah, there's something up there. There's a lot of smoke there. I can't say there's any fire, but to me, it's too coincidental. And remember, there's no coincidences in history. So
No,
there's something up
no,
there, and I
no.
hopefully one day can piece together some stuff. There's a lot of New Orleans stuff where I can see visible, what I call potholes, where there should be data, but there is no data, So, yeah, there's a lot more to New Orleans and what was going on there than even what I've uncovered.
Yeah, yeah, and I want to just circle back to the media again. One more. I mean, it just even today. I mean, one thing that social media exposed was the mockingbird aspect of the media. In my opinion, that went all the way from I would say from the Korean War, basically, or maybe you might.
Yeah, that's about right. Well, I guess the real Mockingbird was in 53, if I'm
Hmm.
not mistaken. But so the cover for Mockingbird was that they were trying to oust a couple spies who were working for like the New York Times or something like that. That's
Hmm.
like the cover story.
Right.
But you know, in the modern era, I don't even think Mockingbird applies at the same level. They're not out there recruiting journalists. All they got to do is get a network. And once you got the network, you got everybody. And so that's kind of how things function today, you
Well,
know?
back then they had templates for these news networks to pretty much say what they were going to say. I mean, like, and they could have different diagrams, like, but it would all be back to the same narrative. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and it's just interesting that you know one of Cronkite's last interviews, he actually talked about there being a conspiracy. I mean, like in his whole life, he talked about there not being a conspiracy. So it's just interesting how a lot of these guys. I mean, I got a bone to pick with people. Like Geraldo. Geraldo had the Good Night America. And he had Grodin on there, and he had Dick Gregory, and they presented the Zapruder tape, and then today he's just like, nope, nope. There was just a lone gunman, all this other type of stuff, and
Hmm.
just you know, I feel like with Geraldo, he had to keep that narrative for him to have a career.
Right. Yep.
You
That's pretty
know,
much how it goes.
and
Have you ever seen Doug Horn's interview of Dino Brugioni on the Zapruder film? Dino,
I have not. I'm gonna have to get into that tonight.
it's like 8 hours long. It's amazing. It's truly amazing. So Dino Brugioni is a kind of scumbag. Dino Brugioni was a CIA photo analyst. He was directly responsible for faking the Auschwitz aerial photographs in the 1970s that the CIA has since admitted were fakes. So Dino Brugioni was he the Zapruder film wasn't supposed to show up at CIA headquarters until Sunday, but he received it on Saturday. He worked on it all day long. He made these big like photo boards where you take still images and print them out really big and put them on a board, like a school project or something. He did all that stuff, and basically he tells Doug Horn, yeah, the video you're looking at, the Zapruder film, he's like, I don't know what the hell that is. That's not what I saw. So that's a great interview. But Dino Brugioni he worked for the CIA, and he's a professional liar. So you got to take some of what he says with a grain of salt. But overall, it's pretty obvious that the Zapruder film was tampered with, and that the version he saw had Kennedy making the left-hand turn. There was no cut, none of that stuff. So really
Hmm.
fascinating, really fascinating. Doug Horn has done some really good work on Zapruder, for sure. I don't know what he's talking about, that there's evidence that there's two headshots from the front. That doesn't seem to me to be possible at all. So I don't know what
You
he.
know, but I feel like Dr. Curtis actually gave a good presentation, to his best abilities for being that old. I mean, like he really, I applaud him. I mean, he was my favorite part of those hearings. He
Right.
came out and he said what he saw,
Mm-hmm.
and again, the Parkland doctors, man, they got a bad rap. They got threatened. They got, you name it. I mean, these guys went through hell and back, and it makes you appreciate them a lot more.
Yeah, I mean, he was definitely shot in the head from the front, and he most likely was shot in the head from the back, which probably came from the Deltex. Um, but yeah, I don't know how. I can't put anybody else in front with a rifle other than Robert Bernard Baker, but it doesn't appear that he shot. There's no evidence. It doesn't appear like he did it all. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, well, and that refutes the story about the silly stories about the Secret Service shooting him and all that type of stuff. Which
yeah, like
then,
yeah, it's funny. The guy who made that film, the the rich man's trick film or whatever it's called.
yeah.
He is the nicest guy in the world. I did a show with him, and I actually ended up having some off-air conversations with him. The
Hmm.
nicest fucking guy in the world. But his work is just so irrelevant. It's just
You know what's
pathetic.
crazy? You know what's crazy, Corey? I talked to my friend about this the other night. That I feel the same way about Gerald Posner. I met him in Portland over at Powell's Books,
No,
and
he's
he's trying
clearly
to.
CIA. His first book was on the fucking Children of the SS or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. No, no.
Right?
I agree with that. But when it comes to just personally, like the person, like he's just a really nice guy. I don't agree with anything he says.
It's so funny because I actually commented that he posted something on Kennedy within the past couple months, and I commented on YouTube and I said, Posner works for the CIA. Ask him how he got the addresses of the children of the SS, because he did. Out of nowhere, these people were supposed to be hidden from the world, and he came up with their addresses. I wonder how. He deleted my comment within like 20 minutes.
Yeah, I, it's just crazy because back to the Marina interview real quick. She's just dragging Posner around when it comes to his information when he was there, and I think it was Larry Howard was the one that was with her, and he got upset in the interview and stormed out off Brokaw. But yeah, I mean, again, it's interesting that only Gerald Posner can actually have all this access to things and come up with a definitive answer, case closed, and he brainwashed several people, several million, maybe million people about it, and you get the people that are just they're so steadfast in a lone gunman theory, and
Mm-hmm.
it's impossible.
It is
If you're
impossible.
if you're a rational human being and you watch the Zapruder tape just by itself, or even just there's no way it was a lone gunman, and for people to buy into that for so many years, it's just
Well, they
ridiculous.
found like 5 rifles in Dealey Plaza that day. So
Yeah.
they
Well,
found
yeah,
well
the Mauser,
they got the
yeah,
Mauser, they got the Carcano, they found a Mauser on the roof of the depository. There's a picture of one of the detectives coming out with a Remington. What else was there? There's the gun that was found by the lawn crew that was traced back to Lauren Hall and
yeah.
Richard Hathcock in Los Angeles, right? They found like at least 5 rifles that day in Dealey Plaza. So it's hilarious when people try to say lone gunman.
Right, and also, and that's not even the rifle, or not even the guns that they, the gunmen themselves actually took with
Yeah,
them, after.
I'm convinced at this point that the gun that shot Kennedy in the head is the gun that they took off of Buell Frazier, the Enfield 303. 100% convinced of that
So
because
not.
the magic bullet was not a fucking pointed. It was not a round tip Carcano. It was a pointed tip 303 round that was planted. It was found by Daryl Tomlinson and O.P. Wright, who told, what was that book, 6 Seconds in Dallas? I forget that guy's name. Josiah Thompson. Josiah Thompson wrote 6 Seconds in Dallas. He interviewed those guys, and both of those guys said the bullet was a pointed tip 303 round, which makes perfect sense if Kennedy was shot with a 303, and then they planted that. But then the FBI swapped it because it goes from those two guys to Richard Johnson of the Secret Service. Richard Johnson hands it over to the head of the Secret Service, and then he hands it directly over to Hoover. And so it is from there that they will send people back to interview. The FBI will send people back to interview Tomlinson and Wright. And the FBI report says they positively identified the Carcano round as the magic bullet, but that statement was fake. The whole thing was a setup, right? So because it was swapped by the FBI ultimately from a Enfield 303 round, which is, like I said, I'm convinced that the rifle they took off of Frazier is the one that killed Kennedy. And actually, I have my guys try to get a hold of Dallas and find the rifle, and Dallas police doesn't know where that rifle is. They have no record of it.
Well, of course they don't know where it is. I
Yeah.
mean, like they don't. Nobody has record of anything anymore. It just seems like it's ridiculous. But Yeah, no, I mean, getting back to just that particular that day and how everything kind of built up to it, we forget how fast it happened. It just happened in like pretty much a couple of seconds. It seems like it was an eternity with how it was really, really quick, and it was basically a military operation.
Mm-hmm.
Boom, 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 done. That's it.
The one thing that surprised
And
me, though, is that in the setup, they gave these guys a lot of freedom to do a lot of things on their own. Like when you realize that it was Kerry Thornley who had the flyers printed in New Orleans at Jones Printing, not Oswald, and you realize that he was the one handling Oswald to do all the Cuban stuff or the communist stuff down there, it becomes pretty obvious to me, at least, about all the connections that he had in Dallas and what he was doing in Dallas. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a second. What were we talking about?
we were talking about I was talking about the split second. Basically, it was like a couple of seconds when the incident happened, and then you derived onto.
Right. So this brings me to where everything seems to have been planned down to like the minute, right? Like the cops pulling up at the boarding house and Kerry Thornley leaving the boarding house within a minute, right? That's not coincidence. That had to be planned to a T. But the problem I have, I'll give you another example of like a weird, interesting discrepancy that needs more research. When you look at the statements of William Whaley and when he dropped off Oswald allegedly near the boarding house, there's a huge time gap between when and where he dropped him off and when he shows up at the boarding house, which is, by my calculations, somewhere between like 10 to 12 minutes. It was only like a minute walk. It was like 3 blocks. So where the fuck did he go for 15 minutes, right? So this to me opens up the door for there being another safe house in that area. Because Kerry Thornley is nowhere. He's not the guy who caught a ride in the cab. Oswald didn't catch a ride in the cab. I don't know who the hell caught a ride in the cab. I just don't. Like, it's a mystery to me. One thing that William Whaley said about his cab driver, about his passenger, was that on his coat, he thought he had a thick coat on, and that on the coat, it was like had a chalky material. Well, the chalky material seems to have come from the book depository when they were doing the floor, because other guys had that chalky material on them also. So who the hell is this guy who got a chalky material on his coat, who obviously was in the book depository, who then catches the cab, is definitely not Oswald, right? So who the fuck is that? I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't have any idea. So that's
Yeah.
another mystery, right? But there's a time gap of like 10 minutes at least when he drops this person off and when they show up and when Kerry Thornley shows up at the boarding house. At least 10 to 12 minutes minimum. So where the fuck did he go for that time period? This would make sense if there was another boarding house there, because Kerry Thornley would have just been hanging out all day waiting for someone to show up to give him the signal to go to the boarding house to meet at exactly 1 o'clock when the cops show up. So they had to have coordination between the cops who knew to be there at 1 o'clock and Kerry Thornley who knew to be there at 1 o'clock, right? So combine this with the delay between the walk from the cab to the house, and you got an obvious second safe house in the area somewhere. Not to mention the fact that William Whaley, when he talked to the news, he didn't give 1026 as the destination address. He gave 1018 North Beckley as the destination address, and that's directly next door. Makes you wonder, did he know something
Well,
or what?
which is crazy, because I think about this very Twilight Zone. Like, then you go to the movie theater, right? And you're in the movie theater, and then there's the second Oswald in the balcony,
Right.
which is just crazy. It's just crazy,
Well, it
man.
makes sense when you go through the series of events, because Oswald entered the theater between 1 and 107, as per Butch Burroughs. So he's in the theater at the exact moment that Tippett's getting killed, right? So he's in there, he's doing the hop around thing, looking for his contact, meets with his contact, buys popcorn at exactly 1:15, goes and sits back down, and he's there for another 40 minutes. He doesn't think anything's going on. If he thought he was getting set up, he would have been long out of there. He would have gotten the hell out of there. The pregnant woman must have told him to wait and watch the rest of the movie. But then you have the whole series of events that happens from the Tippett shooting, which then goes over to the secondhand junk shop on Jefferson, where allegedly this person who resembled Oswald's Kerry Thornley, but this person looked like Oswald. They attempt to go up to the second floor of the secondhand junk shop on Jefferson. They can't get in. He's seen by Dorothea Dean at Dean's Dairy Way. She sees him take the jacket and throw it onto the tire rack, not under a car. Mrs. Dean then goes and retrieves the jacket and holds onto it till she gives it to the cops like 45 minutes later. So that's a jacket anomaly we have now. But from the secondhand
Yeah.
junk shop, Kerry Thornley will then go to the Abundant Life Temple, where the cops show up there. But he
Yeah, and this would refute the Larry Crawford jacket
right,
from
right.
California. Yep. So, and that's what I initially thought. I thought that Larry Crawford was the one that was at the scene with Jack Ruby that
Yeah,
shot
I went
him.
down that road too, and it just ended up dead ends. Because you got
Yeah.
Jack Ruby right now is over at Parkland Hospital, right? While Samuel Ruby is making his way over to the hallway of the Dallas Police Department. That's how that went
Just
down.
crazy. So real quick on the double Ruby scenario with the brothers
Mm-hmm.
there. So you believe it was coordinated that Samuel had one role and Jack had the other role,
100%.
and then Jack would be the guy that would actually pull the trigger to kill Oswald when the day came.
Right. And I believe it
Yeah.
was Samuel who bought the money orders because Jack Ruby was seen in the basement going back to like 9:30 in the morning. So he was seen
Yes.
there that
Yes.
early. So he was there the whole time. So he couldn't have bought money orders. It was his brother who bought the money orders.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Interesting.
It was his
Interesting.
brother who was in the hallway at the Dallas Police Department. It was his brother who was at the midnight press conference. It was his brother in the background of the Dallas Morning News at about 12:45 p.m. where he's photographed talking on the phone. We know it's not Jack Ruby because Jack Ruby doesn't have a left index finger, and Samuel Ruby does. And that's the dead giveaway because Samuel Ruby's left index finger is extended the length of the telephone. Yep.
Really?
Jack
Wow.
Ruby's finger was
Wow.
bit off like 10 years previous in a bar fight. So, yep.
Wow. Well, you learn stuff. I mean, it's crazy. Your wealth of knowledge is just amazing,
Well,
my
the thing
friend.
that
So
kind of drove me nuts is as I'm going through all this stuff and I'm figuring this out and I find the picture and it's got the finger on there. I'm like, how the hell do people think that's Jack Ruby? Right. So I started coming across things and I'm like, there's no way. How does everybody believe this when it's this? Right. And so that's when I started to try to interact with the JFK research fucks who like wanted nothing to do with my work ever. Not from day fucking one, which is kind of unusual. You think these people want to know something, you know? They wasted their whole lives on nothing. They might as well get the answer.
we got a question here for you, Corey, and I can do my best to help answer these, but it's in chat right now. It says, "Why was Kennedy killed Israel angle
Oh
only?"
yeah, because he was gonna end Israel. Like, regardless of what people say about him and his relationship with Israel, he fucking hated those people. He was gonna shut them down entirely. He knew all about Dimona. The whole world knew about Dimona since 1960. It was in Time magazine, and they kept lying to him about it. And so he threatened Ben Gurion. Nobody really knows what was said, but you have the Battle of Letters in May of '63, which concludes with a letter from Levi Eshkol because he said something to Ben Gurion and it caused Ben Gurion to step down like immediately. So I don't know what the fuck he said, but he then sends a letter to Levi Eshkol, the second prime minister or interim prime minister, I should say, and he basically says, "We need to get into Dimona. We need to know about the peaceful intentions of Dimona." And it could seriously, not allowing inspectors in could seriously jeopardize our relationship, basically, is what he says. He was looking for any reason he could to cut all funding to Israel, period. That's why he got killed. That's it. Now, the CIA had
Interesting.
their own reasons. The CIA had their own reasons. The mob had their own reasons. Everybody had their own reasons. But the green light was given by David Ben Gurion, which then funneled them orders down through the Mossad, which was, we can make it real simple. Permindex, the board of directors of Permindex, which included Alan Dulles and Angleton, Clay Shaw, Roy Cohn, Tibor Rosenbaum, Joe Bonanno, mobster, Modalitz, mobster. These guys, like
Mm-hmm.
Permindex, is the proof that the CIA, Mossad, and the mafia all work together. And then from
Mm.
there, the orders got funneled down to Louis Bloomfield in Montreal through CMC. CMC is where a lot of the money got funneled. And then from there to Clay Shaw in New Orleans. And there you go. The other gaps to be filled in by Traficante and Giancana. And then you got the Cleveland guys, and that's the assassination.
That answered all three questions my friend actually has. So yeah, you didn't need to. I didn't need to ask him. I guess it would say who is the project manager essentially, and you just nailed it. I mean, if you want to reiterate that, like who
Well, if you
essentially
look at
is the.
the local level down in New Orleans, I mean, it really got offloaded to the mob. And you got guys like the CIA mafia crossover guys like Roswell Thompson, who's named by what was his name? Thomas Beckham. Him, Vincent Marcello. He names a bunch of people who he was at a meeting he goes to a meeting and David Ferrie's there, and Vincent Marcello, Roswell Thompson, Anna Bergglass, and a couple other people, and they give him a package, and he takes the package to Lawrence Howard at the Executive Inn in Dallas. So when you start to look into those people who are in that room, Roswell Thompson, that connects you to Fred Chrisman. That'll connect you. Obviously Vincent Marcello, representative of the Marcello crime family. But yeah, Roswell Thompson's an interesting guy. Hung around, good friends with Jack Martin, close with Fred Chrisman and Thomas Beckham, and then he reappears up in Washington after the assassination with when Beckham and what's his name, Lavender, and Chrisman all have that like weird operation going on up there, whatever the fuck they're doing with the fake churches and fake college degrees and stuff, which all ties into that as well. So yeah, interesting stuff. Yeah, so when you start to dig, you find all the connections. You find all these guys this is all one organization. Like, you can't separate the Mossad, the CIA, and the Mafia in 1963. You can't. It's not possible. The real glue and the proof there, more proof, is all the Numex stuff that went on, the stealing of our nuclear material for their bomb. That all happened. That was all fucking Mafia and CIA and Mossad. It's the same relationship that's been together since LA in the 40s. This relationship started in LA in 45, 46, continued with the Sonborn Institute through 47. Meyer Lansky's direct relationship with Ben Gurion. Then you have the Banque de Crédit Internationale. That's where all the money flowed through. The Banque de Crédit Internationale, BCI, was the bank that Israel used in its early days for all their international transactions. It was also happened to be started by Tibor Rosenbaum and was used for Meyer Lansky's drug laundering. So,
wow.
It's BCI is very, very important.
So that would explain Hoover's disdain towards Alan Dulles. I mean, like he probably had knowledge of all this, and he just absolutely despised him because he was a man of ego and power.
I can see that. I can totally see that. And,
Yeah.
and seeing how Alan Dulles is doing all this international stuff that doesn't really involve America and dragging America into shit.
Yeah, from an outsider's perspective looking in, you look at Diem and then you look at Lumumba.
Mm-hmm.
They both were assassinated, and that was directly. I feel like it was directly. Well, I know it was directly correlated with CIA.
Yeah, and that was all through CMC. It was all through Permandex as well. All that was done. All the financing stuff was done through Permandex also. Who was it? Jean-Pierre Lafitte was actually in Congo at the time Lumumba got killed, which is wild to me. So Jean-Pierre Lafitte is one of two QJ Wins, the assassin recruiter. So I made a big mistake early on. I thought that was doublespeak. I thought the whole idea that QJ Win was a recruiter for assassinations was doublespeak, and that QJ Win was actually the assassin himself. But no, I was very wrong. Very wrong. Al Borelli really kind of helped me sort out the stuff, because I had eventually come to the conclusion that there were two QJ Wins, because there were constantly two different sets of references. One to QJ Win's connections in Corsica, which is France, like the Corsican mafia. And I kept seeing references to him in Madrid. I'm like, Scorzani's in Madrid. What the fuck are they talking about? And then I realized Scorzani and Lafitte were both QJ Win. And then Al Borelli proved that in his book, Coup in Dallas. Al Borelli found conclusive evidence of that in Coup in Dallas. So, yeah, fascinating stuff. But yeah, the idea that QJ Win was there when Lumumba got assassinated, that connects a lot of dots. A ton of dots.
Interesting. Charles, I know he had a question earlier. Do you want to jump on here and ask the question here? I can invite you to be a speaker. See if Charles actually wants to jump in and ask a question here in regards to. Charles has a fascinating story. I'm going to be doing a spaces with Charles here soon in regards to he has a his family's they're interactive with the 007 Bond type thing, so he has a lot of parallels with the movies and
Oh, cool.
and it's a really interesting scenario. I Charles is a really good guy, so looking forward to talking to him about it. But Charles, I invite you to come on and ask a question if you like. If we got nothing for you, then we'll stand by for a bit. But yeah, it's just interesting because you have the You made a really good point earlier about people that write books, and I feel like the people that are writing books essentially are the ones that they're trying to get money. They're trying to link, people into things where it just doesn't add up. I mean, I feel like I've read in my lifetime regarding the Kennedy assassination probably over 200 books, 250 books, something like that. And it just it's interesting, like especially like within Case Closed and all these other ones. Your book, though, however, and I'm not just saying this to fluff you up. Your book is actually just straightforward. There's nothing in there that speaks to me that you're trying to do monetary gain. You're just telling the truth.
No, man, it took me 2.5 years to write that fucking book. And if you try to write a book for monetary gain, the book's gonna suck. Like, you got to be passionate. And it's got to get you out of bed in the morning, and you got to be on there till 2 o'clock in the fucking morning every night. You know what I mean? And so I'm like 220 something pages into my new book, and I knocked that out in like 6 weeks, super fucking fast. And I just hit a wall where I had to take a break. You know what I mean? Like, the whole
Hmm.
past, well, I haven't done shit, and I haven't even touched it in like 10 days because I just realized the book I was going to write is no longer the book I'm writing, which sucks. I was trying to write a 250-page book, and I haven't even gotten to I haven't even gotten to the fucking Marines yet, and that's going to take 200 pages.
Jeez,
So,
that's crazy.
but the great thing about writing a book is that to it forces you to get everything right. Right? You can't get anything wrong. You
Hmm.
have to go back over everything, and your understanding of the material has to be there before you can
Absolutely.
write a single fucking word. So right now, I'm really struggling with a section because in I'm struggling with the section of Oswald in New Orleans in 1955. It's been really fucking. It's so complicated because you have one Oswald going to Fort Worth, going to Monig Junior High School, and you have the other Oswald staying at Beauregard. And so, but then they have a bunch of address conflictions and job conflictions, and like it's wild. And so I'm stuck on trying to figure out how to just get through this last part of it. I mean, I've gotten through most of it, but I'm just this one little transition section to get to the Marines is driving me up a fucking wall because I have to understand it perfectly before I can explain it, and I'm having trouble understanding it. You know what I mean? Because it's so
Yeah,
conflicting.
absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, so a little background on me. I'm a musician. I've produced some albums, and I've worked on different albums before, and so I know exactly what you're talking about. You'll have the 9 songs on there, but you have to have 10, and then that tenth one, you run through different ones that suck or ones that you just like. I don't know if it fits the theme of the album, so it's like you're kind of stuck in that particular
Yeah,
point. So I know that for a fact, and
there's been days I sat down on my computer to work and like nothing came out. Like you just nothing.
yep.
You're just like nothing's
Mm,
happening here. You
yep.
know.
Man, I hear
And
you,
then you feel
man.
guilty
Writer's
about it,
block.
and you're like, it causes a whole bunch of psychological issues.
Yeah, it sure does, man. Sure does.
But
Yeah.
I've got the next bunch of books already like outlined in my head. I mean, I'm going to do these 3 volumes on Oswald, Oswald up until he leaves the Marines, then Oswald in Russia. And then I'm dreading getting to like the final volume because that's going to take forever because I'm going to go over I'm going to chronologicalize everything for Oswald day by day for that whole year and a half until the assassination.
Wow.
You have
Wow.
to because there's so much conflicting information. I got people
So,
who
but how are you going to do that in 250 pages, though? That I mean,
Oh, that one.
unless you're, are you going to?
That's gonna be that's gonna be down the road. That's gonna be a much longer book.
Oh.
It's gonna take me 200 pages just to get through the Marine stuff because the Marine stuff is chock full of Oswald in 2 places at once. Oswald being
Mm-hmm.
seen by people who, like Oswald allegedly was seen in Memphis when he was in the Marines, but I can prove he wasn't in Memphis. But we have statements putting him in Memphis, and then we have other documents from the Marines showing that he was an airline mechanic, not a radar operator. Oswald was never a fucking radar operator. Let me make this really clear. Oswald is not a single person on planet Earth who can put Oswald behind a radar unit ever. The closest anyone can ever put him is as a plotting board operator, which is the guy who stands there and the radar operators call out numbers and he writes them on the board. That is the closest Oswald ever came to a radar unit. Oswald went through a 6-week radar school. To actually be a radar operator, you have to go through a 33-week school. So the whole story of Oswald being a radar operator to me is a cover front story. And when you really dig into it, places that he's supposed to be in the radar room, he's in trouble. And he's either on like administrative duty, emptying trash cans and shit, or working in the mess hall or on guard duty. That guy was in trouble for like 75% of the time that he was in the Marines.
You know what's interesting? There's a photo of him in the Philippines. There's a John Wayne. You know the one I'm talking about? There's John Wayne's in the
Oh, that
Philippines.
picture should not exist. That picture is an anomaly, and the date that people give for that photo doesn't make any sense. That photograph is supposedly taken in like what, February of 58. Oswald shouldn't have been there in February of 58. He left there in January of 58. So that photograph had to have been in January of 58. But that conflicts. That photograph is a major anomaly because that conflicts with Oswald being in two places at once at that time period, because he is in two places at once at that time period. So yeah, that photograph has caused me a lot of stress. A lot of the photographs of
Well,
Oswald in the Marines caused me some fucking stress. There's a
well, but it's interesting because you mentioned that he was doing, cleanup jobs, like mess hall, all that type of stuff. It seems like it was actually a cafeteria luncheon, and looks like he's standing outside on a
right,
break,
right,
just sitting there chilling out.
right, right. That conflicts with the idea that he was in a radar unit or he was working guard duty. You know what I mean? So, like another big mystery, which hopefully we'll probably never get an answer, but the death of Martin Strand is a major anomaly in Oswald's military career. Martin Strand, ultimately, it concluded that he accidentally shot himself to death. But when you go through the autopsy reports and all that stuff, ain't no fucking way he accidentally shot himself the way they say he did. He allegedly was playing with his shotgun and dropped it on the floor. And when he dropped it, it went off and shot him under the left armpit from a distance of 8 inches. So the Marines were unable to recreate the shooting. And on top of that, guards on guard duty in that unit, they didn't carry a loaded weapon. They carried shotgun shells in their pocket. They were only to load it if they suspected there was going to be an incident. So he never should have had a loaded gun at all. It should have been empty. But no, he ends up dead. Not only that, his brother, Martin Strand's brother, I forget his name offhand. 4 months later, he's in the Navy. 4 months later, he mysteriously falls off a boat. They don't find his body for like a week. Turns out, both of those brothers were stationed together at Corregidor when Oswald was there. So, what are the odds of two brothers mysteriously dying in the Marines? Not in war. They just mysteriously die. One accidentally gets shot in impossible circumstances that they couldn't recreate, and the other one falls off a boat. Something tells me that those guys were killed because they had knowledge of the two Oswalds, because Oswald's stay in the Philippines has an overlap, but they're in two different parts of the country. So it's really
Yeah,
fucking weird.
and
It's really weird. The Martin Strand incident to me is like, whew, wild.
yeah, and I'm going to look into the Martin Strand incident. I think that's fascinating. I want to zoom forward probably about 20, 30 years to Shield about him killing himself. That seems to be another suspicious angle too.
Well, he killed
And
himself, but then it was recorded, right? There was a recording of it. Like he kills himself, and then after he kills himself, the beeper on the door goes off, like someone came in or left the room. So
which Bill O'Reilly said he's the one that showed up there right after it happened, which I think is a bunch of
that sounds
bullshit.
weird. That sounds weird.
Well, yeah, I mean, but okay, hold on. So I think Bill O'Reilly is weird in general. I just think that for I his whole story is weird. I think he's a guy that is either CIA or compromised somehow. I mean, he is if he was that close to the Shield right after that happened, and then he just gives his books that he writes are just so like matter of fact too. I mean, I've read the Lincoln one. I read the obviously the JFK one, but yeah, he's suspicious to me.
Yeah, I think Garrison was under the notion that Shield would go to places that would soon after be couped. Like he was like part of a pre-coup team or something like along those lines. So I don't know how much truth there is to that, but you never know. I don't doubt it. And there's nothing beyond the ability of the CIA to double
Well,
purpose
it's
people.
just weird because like during that time you had all these guys die, like Roselli and Giancana, and then it was just a pocket of people
Yeah.
that died at that particular time, and anybody that had information and stuff like that. So I'm just Which we have another question on here. I'd like to. It's friend from a friend of mine. It says some say LBJ was the mastermind. You've mentioned Winterland. What was his role specifically, other than to take over as president, Vietnam, and
Oh,
etc.?
well, that guy never won an election in his life. That guy was a Israeli puppet from day one. And as soon as he got this, people don't realize this, but that was a foreign coup that took over our country on November 22nd. That's how I see it.
Oh yes.
100%. Israel took over
Yep.
our country when they killed Kennedy and installed their puppet, Lyndon Johnson, who then did the liberty and handed them the keys to the kingdom. And that's why we've been, an Israeli colony ever since. So
Interesting. Interesting.
mm-hmm. And
Well,
I had hoped Trump was going to do something about it, but it doesn't seem like that's the case.
yeah. I mean, we can go into that. I mean that yeah. Again, I don't really want to go into the Iran Israel thing right now. I'm just going to wait for it to,
Yep.
to play out. But I think the more we keep digging, the more we keep getting into this thing, the more. I mean, I always tell people that you're the guy that I'm sorry. I just think that you're the one that for me, since I met you, you're the guy that really is. You eat and breathe this type of stuff.
Yeah, and I've been committed so long, I don't have a choice anymore. So, shit.
Yes, sir. Well, listen, man. I want to thank you for your time tonight. We're gonna close out tonight, and I want to thank the audience that's been here, Lioness, and everybody else that's been here tonight. Jack, Shot John, JFK Files, of course Charles, and every other listener is going to be listening to this here in the future. We do appreciate it, and Cory, please plug in your book to everybody that doesn't have it. It's called A Warning from History, and just give a brief hypnosis before we check out.
Yeah, warning from history. I wanted to identify the shooters, and I did. And so that's what the book's about. And in identifying the shooters, it lays out the case for everything else, which is pretty wild because that's where to start. Everyone's looking to find answers with Angleton. You're not going to find any answers with Angleton, okay? He's irrelevant at this point. So, all the good stuff is already out there. All the good documents are already out there. All the relationships that play are already known. This isn't a big mystery. It shouldn't be a big mystery. The only thing obscuring it is the level of tradecraft that they employed, the impersonating Oswald, all over the place, all that stuff, the whole setup, right? That's all tradecraft. I'm sure they have
Well,
it. I'm sure they have it in a training manual somewhere.
yeah, and I would say also, I mean, yeah, tradecraft's a really good word. I also say propaganda. The more they keep fluffing it up about, the lone gunmen and other things that we can get lost in. You know what I mean? Like the other areas that we can get lost in, LBJ this or, what I mean? Like it's just all different angles and different factions and different camps. That's what gets everybody lost in the weeds, and they have to depend on documents and they have to depend on a lot of different things in order to get, quote unquote, the smoking gun. So that's my last take of it. Cory, if you want to close out, and then we'll be out of here.
Sure. My next book will be out probably about, I don't know, 2 months. What I'm thinking at this point, if I can get back on track really soon. See, I have a big project. We're launching a crypto project on July 1st. We've been working on for over a year. So that's been kind of absorbing a lot of my time. But you can find my stuff at coryhughes.org. And that's probably the best place to find like all my links and stuff.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank everybody again for joining us tonight, and everybody listening on these spaces on Rewind. Everybody have a great night. Cory, thank you again. You guys have a good night. Take care.